Hello, I'm Jan Czerwiński. Welcome on board the Eastern Express. I hope you enjoy the journey. Now, our show takes a magnifying glass to the world's most pressing issues and sometimes burns them with the laser of satire. And today we're taking a closer look at the budding Russia-Iran relationship. The two pariah states from different continents have more in common than you may think. Let us dive into the geopolitical quagmire that's been brewing like a pot of borscht on the stove of international relations. First, let's take a look at our report, and then, as always, we'll be diving into the details of the matter.
When everyone had shunned Russia for its invasion in 2022, there was one country which reached out to the newly made hermit Vladimir Putin. Ever since, Iran has been supplying the Russian war machine with various equipment, the most notable among them being the now infamous Shahed drones and ballistic missiles. The first meeting was followed by several others, which have brought Russo-Iranian cooperation to levels at which they had never been before in history. The war between Israel and Hamas, which broke out in 2023, is another area where Iran and Russia have been holding hands. Since they are united in their dislike of the United States, they've been trying to oppose Washington and its allies like Israel and Ukraine wherever they can. Syria is another part of the world where this cooperation is visible, since reports indicate that Russian troops stationed there are looking to work together with Iranian troops active in the region. This blooming friendship isn't limited to just espionage and the military. Trade between the two countries has also been in full swing. Both of them are trying to circumvent Western sanctions and find an alternative to the US dollar and the SWIFT banking system. They've also been working together as part of various trade formats, such as the Eurasian Economic Union, in which Russia plays a leading role. Iran has historically tried not to pick a side between East and West, as per its foreign ministry's famous slogan. Yet given the current direction the world is heading, given the actions of the Iranian and Russian governments, and seeing the condemnation of their actions, it's hard not to notice these two hermits trying to form a new community.
And now, as always, it's time to take a look at the issue in greater detail. So, let's begin. Picture this. Russia and Iran, two powerhouses of their own right, joining forces to forge a new geo-economic reality in the South Caucasus. It's like the Avengers teaming up with the Justice League, but instead of fighting supervillains, they are rewriting the rules of regional politics and trade. Now, you might be wondering, why would these two unlikely bedfellows cozy up in the first place? First up, Russia's expanding missile arsenal. It's like they're playing a game of nuclear Tetris, but instead of blocks disappearing, they are stacking up potential doomsday scenarios. It is time for Putin to realize that the Cold War is so last century. Speaking of Putin, let's talk about his bromance with Iran. It's like watching two Bond villains team up to create havoc in the world, except this time there is no secret agent coming to save the day. As Russia pivots towards Asia and Iran tilts towards Eurasia, it feels like we're stuck in a game of Risk, where the only winners are the military-industrial complexes. Now, let's take a trip to the South Caucasus, where Russia and Iran are trying to forge a new geo-economic reality. It is, in fact, like watching two heavyweight boxers dance around the ring, each trying to land a knockout blow without realizing that they're both punching themselves in the face. Iran, the Persian powerhouse with a knack for defying Western sanctions, is also eyeing the South Caucasus like a hungry hawk. With its economy squeezed tighter than a tube of toothpaste, Iran sees the region as a lifeline to bypass international restrictions and breathe new life into its economy. Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, they could be caught in the crossfire, unsure whether to embrace the newfound attention or fear the consequences of being pawns in a bigger game. So, where does this leave us, dear viewers? In a world where geopolitics is a chessboard and every move has consequences, the Russia-Iran Alliance in the South Caucasus is a game changer, for better or for worse, probably the latter. And now we're moving on to our interview. Our guest today is Martin Janovski, Middle East expert at the Jagiellonian University. Hello and welcome to Eastern Express.
Hello, and thank you for the invitation.
So, do you think that Iran and Russia are truly best friends forever? In other words, is this informal alliance likely to morph into something more formalized? Of course, we would like to avoid that. But nevertheless, if this truly is what's going to happen, it is actually better to know about it in advance.
Oh, definitely, it's better to know it in advance. Unfortunately for us, unfortunately for Ukraine and for the West, the ties between Moscow and Tehran are getting stronger and deeper. Still, it's not a strategic alliance of any sort, but a strong partnership, especially on the field of banking system and military equipment.
Of course, the military side of things is the most disturbing. Long-range missiles. This is probably something that strategic experts in Washington, in Europe and in Ukraine itself are most worried about because of the potential range of that. Potentially a moving Russian launch site far beyond the range of Ukrainian weapons. Do you think that this is likely to be something of an informal red line? In other words, do you think that Western nations could react in some way to this development, saying, look, enough is enough, you cannot really proceed with that any further, and we need to react?
From one point of view, yes, but from the other hand, the West has very limited options, as the Iranian Islamic Republic of Iran is under the severe maximum sanction pressure system. So it's hard to imagine how we push those sanctions even further. The options to disrupt the Iranian military industry are also very limited. So short for negotiation, our hands are pretty much tied.
You know, skeptics could say that, the West actually forced the situation upon itself because these two countries, Russia and Iran, have backed themselves into a corner. So they see themselves in a similar situation. And, well, they say to each other, look, we are actually on the same page, so we need to cooperate. Now, the downside, from our perspective, is that they are not really calculating anymore. It's not like China, with whom you can try to negotiate, you could try to produce some incentives whereby they might actually think, well, maybe working with Russia on a full scale, probably not a good idea because we still have economic ties. These economic ties are eroding. Do you think that this is the right way of looking at it, or is there still any way to disentangle this budding alliance?
Definitely is the right way. China, although is not our, let's call it, friend, surely is a part of at least economical global system of from economical perspective. And any kind of open or hot conflict with Europe, with the West, would be devastating not only for the global, not only for European, but also for Chinese economy. So there is a lot of things to discuss. There is a lot of space for any kind of negotiation. And unfortunately, as you said, chronologically, first Iran, then Russia put itself outside of the system and wrapped its own policy in ideological ropes. And at the moment, both countries, Iran and Russia, are positioning themselves as the defenders of anti-imperialism, defenders of anti-colonialism, and defenders of so-called global south. It is very hard to negotiate, it's very hard to talk about such ideological perspectives.
And anti-colonialism really does sound quite ironic if Russia actually says that it is promoting this idea, being, one could say, the very last colonial empire in existence and still following these outdated ideas. Now, in the previous question, I was a bit of a devil's advocate. Let me contradict myself here and say that, in a way, these countries have pushed themselves out of the system because they were experiencing or exhibiting such intransigence when it comes to many different things that the West was asking asking of them, including complying with certain human rights standards and standards which are common to all nations across the world, that essentially they are now out there. They are outsiders. So the big question is, do you think that we should totally rule out any non-diplomatic options? I'm asking that because once upon a time, we used to have a very trigger-happy US president who was not really afraid of taking actions of this kind. I'm not saying that he did good things only. In fact, he did many things which deserve our censure today. But just the fact that he was prepared to act rather than simply trying to wait it out, or trying to produce new results by applying the same methods, which is scientifically pointless, as one person a long time ago has once said, it proves that there might have been other ways in the past. What do you think about that?
For sure, in the past, approximately in the 90s, when the United States power was, let's say, less limited, and Iranian and Russian states were in state of maybe not disintegration, but a transformation. There was a time for some strong, let's say, strong, more kinetic policy.
So you're saying it's a missed opportunity, essentially?
Yes. We could say that, of course, but there was also a diplomatic missed opportunity during George Bush Jr. Administration, when he couldn't or didn't want to start a detente policy with Iran offered by then President Khatami. Later on, Iran decided to start more aggressive policy as the answer for the United States activities in the region. Now, it would be very hard, if possible, to reverse that policy, as both sides treat each other as lethal danger and imminent threat to its own interests. Of course, from the Iranian perspective, the threat is much, much bigger than from the United States perspective. But still, Iran poses a significant threat to United States policy, interest, and allies in the Middle East region.
Of course. I mean, the problem is that Iran has been such a troublemaker recently. It's not just about selling weapons to Russia. If it was only that, one could think that perhaps some sort of new economic deal, removing sanctions, allowing a trade in oil, might perhaps, sway them to follow our ways instead of those of Moscow. But because it's entangled in all this, this entire network of issues in the Middle East, supporting Hamas, supporting the Houthis, probably impossible to essentially offer them economic incentives, looks a bit like a Gordian knot there. So my question is, do we have alliances and friendships in the region which could balance it out? I'm talking specifically about Israel and about Azerbaijan. Can we leverage our alliance with these countries or enhance this alliance in order to create some sort of counterbalance there?
There is always a chance to create counterbalance. However, each country in the region, each country in the world has its own agenda. And as Iran built up quite formidable military and political force in the region, it is unlikely that any state, maybe except, of course, Israel, would try to gamble with Iran.
So Israel is a very specific case, right? Because it is a natural ally of countries such as Ukraine and Poland, except that diplomatic relations have been difficult throughout the years. And also there is a large minority of Jews who moved into Israel from the Soviet Union, and they have votes. So every government actually needed to make concessions towards them. And this was why Israel tried to maintain good relations with Moscow. But Moscow has been very supportive of Palestine, right, of the Palestinian cause through Iran also in recent months. So that might lead these relations to sour. Can the West actually benefit from that, extending its hand towards Israel and saying, look, now there is a unique opportunity. They are not your friends anymore, but we are. And if you help us in Ukraine by providing weapons, for example, this friendship can flourish.
That's the argument one could use, but still there is, from the point of view of Israel, there is a problem of ongoing war, or to be more precise, a battle between Israeli defensive forces and Hamas and partially Hezbollah. So Israel, although very powerful from the military perspective, is busy with its own problems caused partially by Iran and Iranian assistance to Hamas and Hezbollah.
And it is difficult to escape the notion that Israel skirmishing with Iranian forces instead of bombing cities in the Gaza Strip, resulting in large quantities of basically large numbers of people being killed, would have probably looked better for the international community as well, because it would be easier to sell, so to say, as being justified, whereas the operation in Gaza is drawing increasing criticism, and one could say rightly so. Martin Janovski was our guest today here on Eastern Express. Thank you very much for joining us and for sharing your expertise.
Thank you very much, and have a nice day.
And now, moving on to Eastern News Flash, bringing you all the other stories from the East that you really don't want to miss. Ukraine is said to have initiated talks with European and American aviation regulators over the possible return of international flights to Ukrainian skies. The country would like to restore safe international air travel despite the ongoing conflict with Russia.
Kyiv closed its airspace to civilian aircraft on February 24, 2022, when Russia launched its full-scale invasion. The European Organisation for the Safety of Air Aviation said in April last year it will be impossible to restore passenger and cargo routes running through Ukraine before at least 2029. Nevertheless, the Ukrainian Minister of Communities and Territorial Development has pointed at the way Israel has handled air travel during its conflict with Hamas as proof of airlines being able to function in conditions that Ukraine is currently experiencing. The specifics on which Ukrainian airports could resume operations currently remain unknown. Ukrainian authorities have said that they await the feedback of European and American regulators. When it comes to the carriers themselves, Ryanair, for example, has expressed readiness to return to Ukrainian skies so long as it's safe to do so. The ministry is also currently negotiating with 3 Ukrainian airlines on the matter.
Vladimir Putin has signed a bill which bans advertisers from working with alleged foreign agents. This decision is expected to make it impossible for independent media outlets affected by the law to earn money.
The Russian government's crackdown on opposition voices continues in full swing. This latest move has sent shockwaves through the country's independent media communities, which decided to remain in Russia after Moscow invaded Ukraine. The new law stipulates that individuals and entities branded foreign agents will no longer be able to work with advertisers. Violators could be fined up to the equivalent of over $5,000. Repeat offenders could be slapped with a prison sentence. Several of Russia's independent journalists have already announced that they will be stepping away from their work in the law's wake. Initial legislation on so-called foreign agents was introduced several years ago. It has affected hundreds of people, from journalists and business people to artists. And the term carries certain cultural connotations as it harkens back to Soviet-era policy.
Latvian police have announced that Russian nationals who visit their embassy to vote in the presidential elections will undergo a screening procedure. Russian authorities have similar procedures in place for Latvian nationals voting in their elections on Russian soil.
The Baltic states are very wary of any nationalist sentiment brewing among their Russian-speaking populations, something that their governments have pointed out multiple times. In Latvia, which is a very significant Russian minority, the police are taking this problem very seriously. The country's police chief says the screening will not only help suppress any attempts to glorify Russia's invasion of Ukraine, but could also contribute to finding Russians who have illegally migrated to Latvia. Last month, Latvia's Justice Minister went on record saying that Russians living in the country who plan to vote in the presidential elections are essentially supporting Moscow's invasion of Ukraine. Since the war's outbreak, Latvia has become a hub for exiled Russian journalists, activists and other opposition supporters who fled their country due to the Russian government's crackdown on freedom of speech and expression.
The first cargo containers carrying supplies from China have reached Azerbaijan via Kazakhstan. The goods are meant to help boost Azerbaijan's businesses and are part of a wider deal on bilateral cooperation between Baku and Astana.
10 more container trains are expected to travel the 7,000-kilometre-long route from the Chinese province of Xi'an to Azerbaijan. The transports are all part of bilateral agreements signed by Presidents Aliyev and Tokayev, focused on fostering trade and small and medium business cooperation. Azerbaijan's state-owned oil company SOCAR and Kazakhstan's state-owned energy giant Kazmunay Gas have also signed a deal on increasing the volume of Kazakh oil transported to Western markets. Kazakhstan's oil output is expected to increase in the coming years due to the expansion of a crucial oil field. In the face of Russia shifting attention away from the region following its invasion of Ukraine and Western sanctions on Moscow, it seems that former Russian partners like Azerbaijan and Kazakhstan are eager to make themselves more independent in matters of trade.
And for this episode of Eastern Express is the end of the line. Please stay with us here on TVP World for more latest news and updates. I'm Martin Janovski. Bye for now.